Hello everyone, this is Graeme Anderson from Four Corners of the Board. Today I'm going to be having a look at a game called Demon Worker. Now in this game you take the role of a candidate to become the next Demon King. You need to hire demons and to send them out to collect resources to support your master plans. But of course, those pesky demons do not work for free, so you have to have the right resources to pay them. And at the end of the game, you'll need the right resources to pay for your grand evil plans and to pay your workers one last time, or you'll end up with no points and never become the Demon King. Now this game starts off with a card draft, but the bulk of the game is a worker placement game, with most workers having a special ability. You need to be collecting resources, but every time you put a worker out to collect those resources, you also have to pay some resources to deploy them. Sounds like an interesting game, so let's get it to the table, see how it's played, then we'll come back for my final thoughts on Demon Worker. So here we have Demon Worker all set up for 3 players. There are 11 work area cards. In a 4-player game you will also add the cemetery and the dump to the mix. I'll talk more about these cards when we talk about gameplay. The sacrifice, weapon, magical stone, and food tokens are placed off to the side. Each player then picks a color and takes the matching character card, all the player pieces, and 2 human workers. You can place one of your player pieces on each of your human workers. You will also place one of your pieces on the scoring track, and each player will also receive 3 sacrifice tokens, 2 weapons, and 1 magical stone. Each player is dealt 2 planning cards, which they will not look at until later. Decide who will go first, and they will receive the first player token. Then each player in order will take the next numbered token. Shuffle the Demon Worker cards and deal out 6 cards to each player. Now, before the main part of the game, you're going to be drafting these 6 cards. That is, out of the 6 you were dealt, pick one, place it in front of you, and pass the rest to the person on your left. Then repeat this process until you have 6 cards in front of you. Once you have picked all your 6 Demon Workers, look at the 2 plan cards you were dealt, pick one, and discard the other. Now the plan cards are going to be used for end of game scoring. They will show you a set of resources that if you can pay at the end of the game, you will receive that many points. There is no penalty for not completing a plan. Let's have a quick look at some examples. Now the main point of the game is to deploy your workers to collect resources so at the end of the game you can fulfill plans for evil points. And in this game, victory points are called evil points. You can also pay your workers for evil points at the end of the game. Any worker or plan you cannot play at the end of the game will score you no points. Now the game is played over 5 rounds, and each round is made up of a supply phase, an assignment phase, and a cleanup phase. For the supply phase, you're going to look at your turn order token in front of you and receive that many resources and or points. The next phase is the bulk of the game, and that's the assignment phase. First, let's have a quick look at some of the demon cards. Each demon worker will have a summoning cost, that is, how much it will cost you to get the card out of your hand and onto the table, as only workers on the table can be sent out to work. The other is the dispatch cost. So after the demon has been summoned, you must pay them to go to work each time that you dispatch them. Most workers will also have a special ability, like being able to take extra resources when dispatched to work. All the special abilities are located on the back of your character sheets. Finally, each demon worker also has an EP value, or evil point. At the end of the game, if you can pay the dispatch cost one last time, you will earn this many points. Now let's have a quick look at some of the location cards. They are essentially split into 3 groups. The first will give you resources. The second group will essentially allow you to convert resources into other resources and score evil points. And the last group are the special locations. I'll talk a little bit more about these when I talk about the actions. On your turn, you're going to be selecting one of your workers and pay the dispatch cost to move them to a location. If there are already tokens at that location, you have to pay 2 food for each token already there, including your own. Once you've paid the resources, you activate your worker power first, then activate the card ability. You must always be able to use the ability of the card to place a worker there. If you cannot pay for the card, you cannot place a worker there. Most of the locations are pretty straightforward. Just collect resources or convert resources. The last 2 cards are a little different. The first is the audience room. Here, you will never have to pay extra food for tokens already there. This location is where you can summon one of your extra workers from your hand onto the table. Again, you would pay the summoning cost and place it in front of you. Now you do not place a token on it yet, as you cannot use a demon worker the same round you summoned it. And the last card is the War Room. This allows you to draw 2 planning cards, keep one and discard the other. This location also allows you to convert resources into other resources, and this is the only action on a location card that is not mandatory. Now once each player has used all their workers or has passed, this phase is over and we go to the cleanup phase. Each player will retrieve their tokens from the locations, then place 1 token on each card you have in front of you. And finally, pass the player token to the person on your left and move the round marker. If this was the end of the 5th round, the game is over. If it wasn't, you'll go back to the supply phase. During the final scoring, you'll see if anyone was able to summon 5 demon workers, that is not including the initial human workers you started with. If so, they're going to be receiving 5 evil points. If you manage to get all 6 workers out, you're going to be scoring 10 evil points. Next, each player can spend resources to complete their planning cards. The resources will go back to the general supply, and the player will score points from the plan. And finally, each player can pay the dispatch cost of their summoned demon workers one last time to score the EP listed on the card. This is the only time that you will score these points from your summoned demon workers, and they will score no points for the cards that are left in your hand. And finally, the player with the most evil points is the winner. So let's get back to the table to see what I thought about demon workers. So what did I think of Demon Worker? You know what, I ended up really enjoying this game. It starts off as a light and simple game, but the last round or so does give you some very interesting decisions to be made. So let's first talk about the components. Now, I really liked the art in this game. I thought the cartoony demon pictures really worked, and they're drawn in a very cartoony way. And the locations themselves, well, you know what, I quite liked the background of those too. I thought they were very nice. The iconography, though, it's a little hard to understand at first, but luckily, on your little player sheet that you get, all the actions of the demons are described here, with everything else kind of described on the front. Now, I wasn't overly fond of the sheet of paper that's your player board, but since it's mainly used for reference and not needed for gameplay, you know what, I guess that's okay. The tokens, they're decent, they're adequate, but most of the time it was just easier to go by the color than what the icons actually were on them. And the card quality is good, and it stood up to my repeated plays of this game. So let's talk about the gameplay. Now the first is the draft. Since this happens before the game actually starts, it's an interesting decision point in the game. You're collecting only the cards you're going to be playing with throughout the game. And I have not found that there are any cards that are better or worse in the game, but they definitely did support different styles of play. For example, if you want to reduce the amount of resources spent, you might want to go with the Genie, which means you don't have to pay the extra cost for the other locations already at a location. Or you could use the Ghosts, who cost nothing to summon or deploy, but you don't score any points for them at the end. So I like those decisions that had to be made during the draft. I also like that as you start to build your hand, you're trying to figure out which cards you wanted out of the draft. And since you're only using a subset of the total cards in the game, the draft was always different, and you could not use the same strategy in every game, as you couldn't be sure what cards you're going to end up with at the end of the draft. I also did enjoy the variety of cards, although quite often the cards were very similar to each other, and there were 2 copies of each card in the deck, but I never found I had an issue when I had a feeling of, oh, you know, I've seen this card combination before. Now during the draft, I found I was building my engine in my head, trying to figure out what I wanted to do first and which of my demons I wanted to get out first. Now of course, that all depended on the players around the table, and that brings up to my next point. The game is a 3 to 4 player game, and I felt it played very different depending on the number of players. At 3 players, it seemed as if the board was wide open, even though you actually have 2 less places to place your workers. I felt as though I was able to collect resources more easily because I was not paying the extra food for the previous tokens on locations. Now with 4 players, the order in which you deploy your demons and where becomes much more interesting and much more cutthroat. Having to pay the extra food for tokens already on a space means getting there early is very important. Unfortunately, you can't get everywhere early. The games usually start off fairly quick. The first round or 2 is fairly quick, with most players doing essentially the same thing. And since the game is only 5 rounds long, I found the game definitely slows down in the last 2 rounds, where everyone is looking at their plans and their demons to make sure they will have enough resources to score their points. You'll see a lot of people mumbling around the table in the last round or 2, thinking, you know, if I go here with this demon and get 5 food, but it will cost me 2 souls to place him, and then I need 3 souls for my plan at the end, but I could trade weapons for souls at this location, but there are already 2 tokens there, so I'm going to need more food. And this can definitely slow the game down, but not to a point that I felt it was an issue. But if you do have multiple people who suffer from analysis paralysis at the table, I can see how this can be a bit of an issue. Now the game weight. So the game itself is fairly simple. And if you enjoy your worker placement games, as heavy as possible with some real kind of crunchy strategy to it, this game is probably not for you. But if you want to introduce the concept of drafting and worker placement to new-ish gamers, this might be a game to try. It wouldn't be the first game I pull off the shelf, but it would be an early one because the game itself is very simple to understand. So as you can probably tell, I really enjoy Demon Worker and would recommend you pick this one up. Now our games tend to last between 30 and 45 minutes, just as it says in the box, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time playing Demon Worker. And honestly, that's it for the moment. Until the next time, thanks for watching.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.